Welcome to Running Out of Space, a podcast about collectors, their collections, and how they make room for it all in their lives. My name is Adam Grabarnik, and I've been a collector since I was a child. It began with stickers, which led to comics, which led to toys, sneakers, posters, pins, wine, and on and on and on. Taking a wide-angle view of my obsession for ownership, I've come to see how my collections have become intertwined with my personality and sense of identity. Speaking with other collectors on the internet and in real life, I've come to see that I'm not alone. The Running Out of Space podcast is a celebration of the spirit that unites all collectors. Because it doesn't matter if you collect paintings, watches, stamps, cars, guitars, or Barbie dolls. There is a common component within the collector themselves that transcends the object collected. Though the trophies may be different, the hunters are more similar than they know. My guest today is Tommy Gelinas, founder of Valley Relics Museum, a cultural preservation project that collects vintage signs and artifacts from California's San Fernando Valley. I've been a Valley resident for over 20 years. It was my location of choice upon moving to Los Angeles from the East Coast. What may have begun as an exercise in kitsch with a heavy dose of Jeff Spicoli worship has developed into a beloved lifestyle for me. Long after the allure wore off of knowing where the truck versus motorcycle chase was shot in Terminator 2, I remained charmed by this area. Sure, there must be some longing for the idyllic family neighborhood stability that I never had as a kid, but come on, it's still Los Angeles we're talking about. It's far from anything stable. Really, there's just something so funky and bizarre, sunny and shady about the 818 suburban sprawl. I really connect with the culture that the Valley has spawned. Thing is, I can't quite put my finger on what exactly that culture is. Something way beyond the strip mall and porno cliches. Not that those are bad in my book, but maybe its inability to be defined is what makes the Valley so rad to me. But one walk through Tommy's collection at the Relics Museum will way better articulate why this area vibes so hard. Tommy really has a way of breaking down the Valley's history like it's a real-life version of the movie Chinatown, which it actually is. The only thing I forgot to confirm with him during our talk was if Tongva Hut on Victory and Coldwater Boulevard is indeed the oldest tiki bar in LA. To see selects of my guests' collections, follow the show's Instagram at Running Out of Space Podcast. Now, welcome to the show, Tommy Gelinas. What's the house style of the Valley?
It's interesting because the Valley was really it was home to the Chumash Indians and the Tongva Indians. There was, a few watering holes, a lot of oak trees near the base of the mountains and throughout the valley. And once the ranches were sold and it started to get subdivided, it was starting to get subdivided into little chicken farms, basically, or, half acre, an acre. And I that's what got me interested, is because when I was a kid, I would see these really old, like 2-story, like ranch homes, and they look slightly decrepit, or you would see some old mid-century building or buildings that might be from like the 20s and 30s. And it just started disappearing. But if you were to like in New York, I've noticed when I was out there about 27 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that, they weren't really tearing much down. A lot of the buildings, they'll build the railway up, around it, over it, on the side of it. But the Valley, had a lot of architecture very similar to old Hollywood, Wilshire area district, and even some parts of downtown LA. And, Ventura Boulevard, has been there forever. Once they built the 101 freeway through there, but to get to your question, it's so hard to describe what the valley used to look like, coming basically from farmland. Even when I was a little kid, there was still a lot of farms left, a lot of dairies. Um, and a lot of the homes were craftsman homes and mid-century homes, the Eichler homes. And it was this suburbia that was really safe and really clean. If I told my parents when I was like in the fourth grade, fifth grade, whatever, hey, I'm going to go during the summer, I'm going to go hang out. We're going to probably ride our bikes from the middle of the valley all the way to Woodland Hills, to the Kennedy surf shop, or whatever. We had our destinations, and the only requirement was be home by dark or be home for dinner. And we cruised the valley on our BMX bikes or our Schwinn Stingrays, no shirt, no shoes, take a couple of drinks out of the hose, and then just drive around all day. And there was that sense of freedom. And as I started to get a little bit older, you had all these BMX tracks all over the valley. You could still ride your motorcycle in a lot of the fields that weren't developed yet. And we had indoor malls, one of the first, states to have fully air conditioned indoor malls. We had one of the very first, like fully cement skateboard park with a large ramp, and then a lot of music venues. And, when we would ride around, you would always hear people on the other side of the hill really talk a lot of crap about the valley. And, us valley kids, we didn't really care. There was so much to do, from cruising Van Nuys Boulevard, going to San Fernando Raceway, going to one of these malls. The other side of the hill, even the beach area, they had the ocean. We had the swimming pools. We would drain the pools and we would ride our bikes and our skateboard in the pools. We were technically the sidewalk surfers, but you had Mongoose, Redline, Champion, Centron, Jag BMX. There was all these bicycle manufacturers in the valley, all the early tracks. The sport of BMX really exploded, and the valley's hugely responsible for creating legends of BMX, of manufacturing the bikes. And then a lot of those tracks that were in the fields became pro tracks early on. We're talking like 73, 74. So anyone that ever raced BMX around the world would end up in the valley racing on one of those tracks. But yeah, so there was just, you had JBL in the valley, you had General Motors, you had Lockheed, you had Cerwin-Vega, Marantz, Super Scope. Movies like E.T. were filmed here. It just goes on. Karate Kid. So us valley kids had like a lot to do, a lot going on. It was really fun and really safe. And so we didn't really care what people said about the valley. We just didn't care. And if we wanted to take the beach bus to Santa Monica, they had a few different like parks. You could get, to your local park. Beach bus for like 50 cents would take you all the way to the Santa Monica Pier by 10 a.m. And then by 2:33, you would have to load back on the bus and be driven back to the valley. And we love doing that. But trying to get someone from like West Hollywood or West LA, Beverly Hills into the valley was like pulling teeth. They just didn't want to come over to the other side. But yeah, a lot of architecture, a lot of suburban homes, safe neighborhoods. Even Panorama City was like a miniature Beverly Hills back in the 50s, because of General Motors being there, because of Lockheed being down the street. A lot of homes were built for servicemen around that area. General Motors provided a lot of jobs as Lockheed and Boeing. But right at the corner of Roscoe and Van Nuys, you had a Bob's Big Boy, you had the Broadway department store, you had Montgomery Ward's, then you had a Robinson's May, an Orbox. And, those were high-end department stores, standalone department stores. And, or you could go over to the Topanga Plaza that was built in the early 60s, or Valley Plaza. And then later on in the 70s, Northridge Mall. So, growing up with people that raced cars and went to the the drag strip in San Fernando, or cruised Van Nuys Boulevard, the celebrities that were around the Valley, the movies that the celebrities that lived in the Valley, the movies that were made in the Valley, how the Valley helped shape the nation. It's an awesome story, and for there to be no museum or no representation, it's one of those things where I started looking early on the internet, probably about 22, 23 years ago. And if you searched Marilyn Monroe, it will talk about her career, but it never really talked about, it does now, but it wouldn't talk about her going to Van Nuys High School, let alone Robert Redford going to Van Nuys High School, or her working in the aerospace industry in the North Hollywood area. So there's all, and we won't even talk about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz being married in Canoga Park. So there's all this cool, stuff. James Cagney's ranch, the Warner Brothers, Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, Barbara Sandwick, Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello. I mean, the list goes on. The Valley was referred to as home of the stars. And as I started to search for history on the internet, you couldn't find it. And that's what kind of started me to go, where did all this stuff go? Why is it continuing to disappear? And is the Valley's not only been neglected, where a lot of these big businesses left, crime started to get bad, certain neighborhoods started to get run down, and we have all this history and a lot of history, and no one's talking about it. No one's saving it. And, I didn't plan it. It just something that kind of happened. And every time I came across some little article in a newspaper from the 40s or some history book, it was like these huge rabbit holes of information. And, I knew what to look for. And so, I can talk to people that are in their like 60s or 70s, and they would say, how do you know all this history? You weren't even around then. But yeah, so that's kind of, I think you only asked one question and I gave you probably about 300 of them.
No, I'm letting you run it. This is like such entertainment for me. I think I got fascinated with the Valley from, at first, Bugs Bunny cartoons talking about Burbank, and definitely Karate Kid, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but even down to like Magnolia, and even down to just like seeing, the Nicolas Cage movie Valley Girl, but also just there's a odd kind of mystique. I know like it gets a lot of guff because it's suburbia, but hearing that BMX really came to fruition down there makes total sense, because you have these neighborhood kids that felt safe enough to go and ride all day. They had the resources and they had the neighborhoods. They had the streets to be able to bike ride down. That's a privilege in and of itself in a big city. I grew up in Miami and I lived in New York. I've lived in cities my whole life. So by the time that I got here, it was a no-brainer. I didn't want to live in the action. I wanted to live in that sprawl. There was something that's kind of very, it is someplace where you can have the space to express yourself. And I know that people don't think that immediately, but you can really just kind of get lost out here and in a way really dial in on what you're into and what you like without all the noise of a big city, which is what I really like. Now, it's interesting to hear that you had General Motors and Lockheed and all of these big businesses, but when I was walking around Valley Relics, you don't have any of that stuff. You have almost independent businesses, old signages from these independent businesses. But even you have down to like the stationery that they use, the menus of these offshoot restaurants, buttons, ashtrays, matches. You have all this ephemera, and all of the fonts and the logos. They all seem so handmade with a certain level of artistry to them.
Yes.
So where does that come from?
It's like with the Googie style, which is a style of architecture. It was very similar to something like you would see in the Jetsons. Mm-hmm. And the name was really kind of a put down, that a lot of the architectures didn't like it. And you know that which has become extremely popular and highly collectible. If you find anything that might be memorabilia, an old clock, um, furniture, mid-century, when you look at mid-century and Googie style architecture, and a lot of that started in the Valley, like with like Ship's restaurants and tiny nailers. There was just so much of that. But you're right. It was very creative. It was simple, but very, very creative. It's interesting. I have 6 kids, and I have, a girl, her name's Viola. She's 9 years old, and they love the museum. They grew up, being a part of that. We were driving out in the Valley and around, and she says, "Hey, Dad," she's starting to like take notice, and says, "Why are all the signs around the Valley so ugly?"
Right.
And and I looked at her and I go, unfortunately, it's true. She was like, "All the signs in the museum are really cool. They got neon and light bulbs and things like that." And yeah, it was very, very unique. I think that, early on in the Valley, it suffered a couple of droughts, throughout the history to present. But there was like when, Mr. Van Nuys and Mr. Lancashire, were taking their ranch property, and, they tried raising chickens, poultry. It ended up not working out. They really found that in the Valley growing wheat, and one of the first people to import or export wheat to Europe. And when you go up the 405 heading towards Santa Monica, what we call the Golden S, that was a carve away of Isaac Newton Van Nuys and Isaac Lancashire, with their horse and wagons transporting wheat from the middle of North Hollywood, originally Toluca, the town of Toluca, then the town of Lancashire. In the 1924, it became North Hollywood. But they would take that wheat, and they would sack it up, and that was their path to the Santa Monica Pier to export the wheat. At the top of the hill, when you get to the top of the 405, before you go over heading towards the Getty Center, that's also supposedly where the Spaniards discovered the Valley, which is interesting because even though, the Native Americans were already here, they just didn't claim anything.
Right.
So, there's that really, really cool history. And, a lot of it just, let me back up. When Mr. Lancashire and Mr. Whitsitt and a lot of these guys with money and businesses bought up a lot of this property, it went from raising chickens and livestock to growing fruit and wheat and things of that nature, really prime for growing. And then they would hit a drought, and that would be an issue because at that time we didn't have water, coming into the Valley like that. So, but they started to, really sell smaller parcels of the Valley, really like subdivide. And even to this day, it went from, a 40-acre ranch, a 100-acre ranch, a 3,000 acre ranch, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller, and it continues to happen where there's like, you can't really build much in the Valley. You actually have to tear something down, which they've continued to do. So it's a really like, I love the Valley, and what I love more is what I grew up with. And what happens is when we talk about people from another country, or we talk about, you can pick any nationality and go, man, that they had a lot of culture. Where they're from, there's a lot of culture. And, California history is extremely young. And, we do have culture. And the culture is the pop culture that we just talked about.
Yes.
And people forget that that's how we identify. And, there's a lot of people go, yeah, but, if someone's from Germany and it goes so far back with the castles and the history and this and that and the other, the Ming Dynasty, you take all this examples, you're like, yeah, that's culture. And I forgot that I have culture. And that was growing up around hot rods, growing up around BMX bikes, hiking around Chatsworth Park, cruising Van Nuys Boulevard that's how I identify. And cultural heritage is so important, and we've been stripped of it. And so, I think I was talking with Daily News, one of the writers that did a story, and he says that, back in the day, they would be able to gauge what stories would always do well on the front cover or as a main story, on the first, second page. And it always is remembering when, remember when. He says those always sell the most amount because, people are thinking of a simpler time. There wasn't as much crime. You could buy a home. You could raise a family. There was a lot of community togetherness. You could just show up at someone's house, knock on the door and ask, hey, can Billy come out and play? Or, hey, why don't you guys come over? We're barbecuing, and it was just a different time. And I feel that, like, me growing up and trying to find old photos 22, 23 years ago, nobody was doing it. There just wasn't anything out there. The Huntington Library was not trying to promote any old photos. No. CSUN has a library now, a digital online archive that is fairly new. But when I started this, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have MySpace. At the time that I started, there was LiveJournal. And I would post up on LiveJournal, and kids would say, there was they've made cars in Van Nuys right where my school is, and then they would tell their parents. Next thing you know, they're like, hey, my dad said his dad worked at General Motors. He's got some old buttons and photos if you want them. And, to have, the Valley was home to the Camaro. That's where the very first Camaro rolled off the assembly line.
Makes perfect sense.
Right. And that was home of the Camaro. And, and then Lockheed producing some of the best warplanes that defended the United States against the enemy, let alone some of the first, taxi buses, airplanes that actually brought people from, here to New York in the same day. So we're producing, warplanes, airplanes, cars, all kinds of satellite engines, rocket engines, filming a lot of movies here. We're Hollywood #2, a lot of, I'm just reiterating, because I have a lot of pride. But yeah, it was a shame that as I tried to seek out knowledge and history, the few little history books were recycled history. Mulholland brought water to the Valley, to LA. The Tongva Indians, were here first, but the Spaniards. So you start to look at some of that stuff. And then North Hollywood was known for growing, almonds and fruit and this and that. So you got like 3 or 4 books, that are pretty popular, that most of them out of print. Now I think there's a total of about 6 or 7 that are worth reading. But the first 4 or 5 of them, they just changed the color, like an anniversary edition of the same history book.
Right.
And it's just like recycled. So a lot of the backstories of the Valley and what I grew up and what I heard, the more I searched, I would just come up against like there's nothing there. So when I started, I got onto MySpace. We did a Valley Relics online museum and vault. And I started posting stuff. And then when Facebook, first came out, it was boring because you couldn't change the headers. You couldn't put any songs on there. And it was really for college students. A friend of mine took me onto it. It was really boring, but I signed up for it. So by 2009, I was one of the first ones on there promoting Valley stuff. And now, and I got to tell you, Curbed LA, did an article, and the writer asked, hey, can I ask you some questions, kind of like what we're doing? And the story turned in, yes, that's right. Guess what? We're going to talk about a place. It might be, it might be synonymous with a putrid, toxic wasteland called the Valley. And, and it was always such a put down with any of those blogs and anyone that was writing on the other side of the hill. And a lot of those people that were doing the writing weren't from here.
Right.
And they would just hear that everyone makes fun of the Valley. So they would continue that. I did more articles for, LA Magazine, Curved LA, Eater.com, and all these things. Now they write good stuff. They realized that for all these years, they lost out on millions of readers because of their arrogance. Mm-hmm. Now they, so many celebrities have lived here, and a lot of them still live here, and a lot of them continue to still live here. I mean, the Kardashians, and, from Ginny Lewis to the Kardashians to Travis Barker. I mean, a lot of them still live here. But yeah,
I see Paul Stanley at my Ralph's all the time.
Right. And that's just normal for us. Mm-hmm. And, but it's a shame that there's been no one preserving the architecture. There's been no one documenting and keeping this stuff. And, I'm one guy, we have a board, we have a lot of volunteers, but to build a museum with very little money and we're so grateful for all, the museum is really made up of rescued items and donations. And really today, how we pay our bills is through events. We have a beautiful event space. Now, did you go to the museum that's at the Van Nuys Airport?
Yes.
Yeah. So that the big neon room, cars come out, and we've married, during the pandemic up to present, we've probably done 50 bat mitzvahs. And then we did, we've married about 10 people.
That's awesome.
A lot of private parties, a lot of photo shoots. And
I've seen some record covers with the bands inside there.
Yes. Yep. And it's amazing. So that's how we keep the doors open. Some people, a lot of people, like even you're like, hey, I grew up on the East Coast. When I came here, I noticed that you have big signs, bikes, and then ashtrays, menus, ledgers, and there's so much more. The stuff that you don't see, like when you came there, even to this day, that's only 30% of our collection. We have thousands and thousands of postcards, photos, rare documents, ledgers, diaries from early pioneers that helped bring the Valley, from farmland into major manufacturing and track homes. So it's been quite the journey. But every once in a while, you get someone that goes there and they don't understand that it's always a work in progress. You've got kind of this preservation side. You have this pop culture side is where you can reminisce. And then we have all these documents that need to be archived so we can eventually, we've so far have scanned probably close to 3,000 photos out of the 10,000 photos we have.
Wow.
So I think we got about 200 or 300 postcards in our archive, and a couple of documents. But it takes time. And, when you're doing scanning and updating an archive, you need people that can dedicate their time. Mm-hmm. So it's just it's always a work in progress, and it needed to start somewhere. So I decided, 20 years ago to, go on the internet and educate people, and then start with the social media stuff. And now, we have a brick and mortar museum. We became a nonprofit just about 9 years ago. And then we opened our first location in Chatsworth. We outgrew that. It became so popular amongst the community, from celebrities to just Valley residents, that said, there's finally a place. My parents died. A lot of my brothers and sisters didn't want any of this stuff. We hung on to it. And now that we want to downsize, we were worried about our grandkids throwing it away. Right. So, so it's just been every week. I get emails and phone calls every day of really cool stuff that people want to donate from their family business. So it's been a great journey.
So what was the first piece that kind of kicked it off, where it propelled it from an online sort of preservation endeavor to full-fledged archiving and museum quality exhibitionism? What was kind of the first piece that really kind of set it off for you?
Well, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know. And when I was reading this book that I found online, leather bound, published in Glendale, it was written and put together in 1933, published in Glendale 1934. And I learned that the town of Girard eventually became the town of Woodland Hills, and that the town of Toluca eventually became the town of Lancashire, then North Hollywood, and that Reseda was the town of Marion, and the town of Northridge was the town of North Los Angeles, and then Zelza. And every time I would find these little nuggets of history, I would look online. A lot of Abe's used books online and usedbooks.com. If you search it right, people put up old, I found probably close to 30 over a 5-year period, school yearbooks, annuals from the early 1900s from San Fernando High. Wow. 1910, 1911, 15, 16, 17 from Van Nuys High School. And some of them had actual photos on the inside of their teachers and classmates, photos that nobody has. And so I felt like that's what I needed. I needed to be educated on where I'm really from and what really happened here. But what started to really, like, with the big stuff, like with the signs, and realizing, like, we need to save, cherishing what we had and trying to preserve what's left. Unfortunately, and I get a little bit of flack from people from time to time because they don't get it. Even when they don't get it and something happens in front of them, they're not putting it together that, once a fence goes up around a building and it's scheduled for demo, it's too late. And usually that's when we step in. A lot of times what happens is people start to put stuff on Facebook by going, oh, look at this old architecture, look at this old sign. And it's, on the other side of the hill, or it's in Monrovia or whatever, because anything from Southern California is really, whatever happened to the Valley, happened first, but it happened simultaneously as well around Southern California. So pickers and collectors that resell will go and grab this stuff when you're not looking, in the middle of the night, or they'll give the dude, we want to donate it. And you get down there and like, well, some guy came by and offered us $1,500 for the sign. So there's a lot of these, God bless them, but these wannabe preservationists that don't have the funding, the equipment, the tools, the space, the warehouse space, to really, or even the lawyers or the knowledge to really preserve something. What they do is they go online and they cause problems. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff gone. I mean, for us to have Henry's Taco sign, one of the very first, gringo taco stands in the Valley, and then to have the Palomino Club sign where Elvis made his appearance, and Johnny Cash, Linda Ronstadt got her start there, Dwight Yoakam. That's where Jerry Lee Lewis played. I mean, that is the country western music hub of the world. A lot of bands got their start at that Palomino, and for us to have that sign and old Pioneer Chicken sign, and there's just all the original Malibu Grand Prix car that's there. There's just so much cool stuff. But a lot of these people nowadays, they jump into a conversation, they spill the beans, and then they try to cause problems. We don't want anything to disappear. We don't want signs to go away, but a lot of times these developers are working with the owners by saying, hey, we want this permit to get approved, and we would prefer you not to share it, work up until the day of,
Uh-huh.
keep the store open. And then if you can push, then all of a sudden it's announced, hey, unfortunately, we're going to close down. It's going to be our last month. They were already knowing and already like, we've owned 4 and 20 pies. We bought it in the 70s. We've been running the last 2 locations in Van Nuys, our Sherman Oaks and in Studio City. And they already planned on selling the building. They already planned. And, for some of these people, we just recently were gifted the Old Trappers Lodge Boot Hill collection that's at Pierce College. And it's early folk art. And some of the students felt like, it was racist. It's very similar to Knott's Berry Farm stuff.
Sure.
The folk art is really odd and very cool. There's a few things that I could see, but what people don't know is that Old Trapper was a white guy, and he had married Comanche. She was 50% Comanche, and a lot of his trapping experience, hired by the U.S. to, a lot of these animals were destroying crops and our food supply, and they hired him. Came out to California. He built a motel lodge and used all of his, because he was, born in the 1800s, early 1900s. He's out there trapping. So by the time he's in his like 60s and 70s and 80s, back in the 50s, he started sculpting out of cement these amazing statues. Pierce College started getting flack from some of the students and teachers by just saying, we don't want the Native American Indian to look like a savage because, a white guy and an Indian are sprawling. I'll tell you what, if I was an Indian and some white guy was trying to get to my daughter and my wife, or vice versa, it's going to be a problem. Or if it's just a cowboy and Indian story, and they're fictitious characters, but Trapper made a lot of the statues in the liking of his wife, his sisters, his grandchildren, and things of that nature. And he was a storyteller. So a lot of his stuff was just made up stuff that didn't represent anybody except, growing up in the wild, wild West. And he lived it.
Right.
So we were gifted that huge donation. And then there's a group out there that does Hollywood tours. That's what they're a touring group.
Mm-hmm.
And they take you around and they show you this building used to be this, and that building used to be this, and this is where so-and-so was born. And when COVID hit, their business went down the tube, and they're operating at a 3.5 star anyway. And they didn't know, because I had to keep it a secret, that we were given this, $500,000 collection at Pierce College of this ghost town made out of folk art called Old Trappers Lodge Boot Hill collection. That it was given to us. They got rumor that that stuff might be leaving. So we're already in the process of taking the stuff out secretly. I don't want to say secretly, but not trying to have people cause problems.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, this tour group that no longer has a touring business decided they were going to be preservationists, that don't have the money or the ability or the lawyers or any funding, that just make stuff up, and has caused, huge problems. And, fortunately, they're causing problems for themselves. They're trying to cause problems for us, but we're so well liked because of what we have done and our track record, so it's never really easy, because this stuff takes time and money. And if you don't have a sharp eye, and if you don't know what you're doing, and you don't make this stuff happen quick, it disappears. Mm-hmm. And not just into private collections. I mean, to the scrapyard, bulldozed over, a wrecking ball. So, I feel that, the Valley Relics Museum is, first of all, we educate the community, we cherish what we had, and we're just preserving what's left. And, there's some great people out there now over the last couple of years, like LA Conservancy. They're doing a good job. They're starting to focus a little bit more on the Valley, but you kind of feel like they're picking and choosing what they want to save. If it's a craftsman house, they're not really interested. If it's a Googie or mid-century building, they're on it to
Right.
some degree, and they're getting better at it. But yeah, so a lot of there's like what you've seen probably when we first opened in that location. We've added an additional 30-40% of new signs.
Wow.
So there's a lot of bowling signs now down there. There's just amazing amount of like My Brother's Barbecue that opened up in 59 in Woodland Hills. That's all up
I
there.
didn't know it closed. I didn't know Brothers was gone. I saw the sign on one of your sites, and I didn't even realize that Brothers had closed.
Yeah, it's done.
Wow.
So there's a lot of new stuff, especially, we got a sign from San Francisco. It's a company that is in the Valley, in the LA area, and San Francisco. It started in San Francisco, which is Mel's Drive-In.
Mm-hmm.
And we got the sign from one of their San Francisco locations, and it's the same location where they filmed American Graffiti. So we put that up. We put the 4 and 20 sign up, an A&W root beer signs that came out of the Valley. So there's Ruben's Red Hot. I mean, just all kinds of stuff. A lot more BMX items. So it's always evolving. We're always adding new stuff. It's nice to be marrying young couples in the museum.
That's sweet.
They're getting, they care enough and they appreciate it enough, and they know it helps the museum. So, and even this, I usually don't turn down a request. I have 4 newer kids, a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and then 2 adult kids. Then I have the museum, and then I have my t-shirt printing shop, which is a big operation. So I'm always really busy, but I was glad that I was able to hook up with you.
No, thank you very much. And I have to comment that the merch at your museum is spot on. I love everything.
Thank you. Yeah, we print that all here. People finally get it together.
What's the sweet spot for you in terms of like signage or design that was in the Valley?
What
era?
Yeah, the era, 50s and 60s, a little bit of the 70s, but I take that back. Even the 40s, 50s and 60s, there's nothing like it. The way the neon looks, the sound it makes, the design. In the 70s, when they redesigned like the Orange Julius logo, I mean, so there's a lot of stuff in the 70s. Probably, I take that back. So when it comes to signage, 40s, 50s, 60s, as far as design, colors, fonts, definitely the 70s and 80s.
Why?
It's like you said it yourself. It's very like creative. Yeah. There's a lot of thought put into it. It's groovy. It's bitchin'. There the colors, the fonts, the characters. It's just amazing. There's nothing like it, and I've not seen anyone reproduce anything similar to that style since then. A lot of people have knocked it off.
Yes.
But going from like, let's say, a business in the 40s or 50s or 60s, and even those graphics, but once the 70s and 80s hit with the like 4 or 5 different colors, there's just nothing like it. It's just amazing. And I've been able to meet some of those artists. They come in and said, "Oh, I designed that shirt for this band," or I met the guy that designed My Brother's Barbecue logo, and it's the same guy that designed the original Orange Julius logo. It was the newer version. So Orange Julius has been around a really long time.
Yeah.
But right around, I want to say 68 or 69, maybe 70, he redesigned it to make the devil still pretty, like, really cool looking. And I heard that a football team, some team went after him because they said that the Red Devils team went after him. Not that it looked like it, but they didn't want them using the devil as their logo because it was too similar to their team logo. But yeah, man, it just there's just something about it.
Things are so safe now. It's like when you see back then, you look at the signage, like people were really going for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's been interesting seeing how these signs are made or taking them apart and looking at the inside and learning how to repair them, how to take them down. Our crew, we have one of the best crews. There's there's about 10 of us that ultimately do everything. And then there's a lot of other people that help out. But from, I mean, the community, I like to call the Valley Relics Museum fans history watchdogs. Every other day, hey, the sign's coming down. Hey, I heard they're tearing this down. Hey, I heard this is closing. Hey, Tommy, you need to check this out. Hey, Tommy, did you see this? So it's like, now there's an entity that people can call, like a hotline, and like say, Tommy, you need to go. And I get back to everybody. It might take me a day or two, but I try to get back to everyone, and I always try to investigate. There's I can't save everything. Some people send a sign that's probably from 2010. It's just plastic, and you hardly ever hear it talked about. So I'm appreciative that people are understanding what we're doing, even though they're not really sure what's cool and what's not cool, or what might have some historical significance.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of people that do, but just the fact that everybody's willing to reach out, to let me know, to show that they care because I care. They're glad that the Valley finally has a museum that encompasses all of the Valley, that has a preservation background. And yeah, so I feel, blessed that there's so much support, that people like you go, I want to hear the story. Would you mind, doing an interview? I like all of it, whether it's, a documentary, to, getting interviewed by local news, or, someone that's doing a podcast. I think that any way to get the message out there and let people know what we're up to is really important. So I really, appreciate you for that.
Oh, I appreciate your time. Bravo to everything. And is the museum open to the public again?
Yeah, so the museum is now open just every Saturday and Sunday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. We do have an event space, so if people wanted to rent that out, we have a lot more new games, some of the best games, from Street Fighter to Elvira Pinball to Miss Pac-Man. We have tons of games set to free play for all our guests. It's $15 to get in per person. We're open on the weekends, and you just got to Google Valley Relics Museum, and there's just tons of articles that come up. Our museum homepage comes right up, and it will not disappoint. Fun for the whole family.
Right on. I have a 7-year-old Valley girl right now.
Nice.
Who I'll bring by. She was actually there the first time I visited. I'm going to bring her back. She loves video games.
Well, let me know, and I'll put you on the guest list.
Oh man, thanks so much.
Yeah, we'll take care of you.